Good afternoon and welcome to the RIC session, Right Sizing Agency Oversight and Inspection. I'm Phil McKenna. I'm the Acting Deputy Director of the Office of Nuclear Security and Incident Response. The session will discuss how the agency proceeded to review and propose recommendations to revise agency oversight and inspection based on the requirements of Section 507 of the Advanced Act and Executive Order 14300. Before we get started, I would like to discuss a few logistics for the session. You probably heard these before. The Wi-Fi passcode is RIC, R-I-C, 2826. Please remember to silence your cell phones. All the sessions in the RIC are being recorded so you can view them later. We'll be handling all the questions and answers electronically in both person and for the remote participants. There's the QR code for submitting questions. That'll go right to the session. So if you're here in the room, please scan the QR code on the screen. If you're joining us virtually, look to the right side of your screen and you'll see tabs for the Q&A and feedback for the session itself. There is no live polling for this session. All questions, whether they're from people in the room or online, go to the same queue so we can see everything in one place. Next slide, please. Next slide. Now I'd like to introduce the panelists for this session. To my left is Gerond George. He's the Chief of the Inspection and Oversight Branch for the Division of Fuel Management and the Office of Nuclear Material and Safety and Safeguards. Next to him is Tim Riti, who's the Director of Regulatory Affairs in the Nuclear Energy Institute. And last is Michael Callahan, who is from the Decommissioning Plant Coalition. We all have presentations today. I'll start my presentation after the opening remarks. Next slide, please. Okay, prior to this session, the Executive Director for Operations, Mike King, sent an email out to NRC speakers late yesterday informing speakers that RIC audiences like nuclear jokes. I thought to myself that is going to be tough getting up with a good joke in such a short amount of time, and maybe I could repeat a joke from 10 years ago. But first, let me tell you how we went about creating a joke from 10 years ago. First, we assembled a 20-person working group. We rewrote the joke several times, placed the joke into management concurrence, where the branch chief, the deputy division director, the division director, the deputy office director, and the office director all reviewed and edited the joke. The joke was then sent to QTE for technical editing, and then to OGC for legal opinion, and finally to the Office of the EDO for final approval. So when I went to pull the joke out of Adams, turns out it was coded as not publicly available. So no joke. As you can see from the agenda, we have 4 presentations to make on oversight and inspection. I will start off presenting the Reactor oversight process and how we evaluated the ROP to provide recommendations to the Commission to revise the ROP. There will then be a presentation by Gerond George on the nuclear materials safety and safeguards business lines, oversight and inspection. Tim Riti will then present NEI's thoughts on oversight and inspection. And lastly, Mike Callahan will give a presentation on the Decommissioning Plant Coalition's thoughts on oversight and inspection. Next slide, please. So you've probably heard about this various times today. The catalyst for doing major revisions to oversight and inspection were the Advanced Act, which was issued in July of 2024. We produced a report to Congress on July 10th from the Commission and sent that to Congress, telling Congress what we were going to do. In the meantime, while we were working on the Advanced Act, the executive order was issued, and I'll talk about how that played into what we eventually went on to do. And again, this is for all agency oversight and inspection. Next slide, please. But first, I'm going to talk about operating reactor oversight and inspection. Next slide. Okay, so a little background on the reactor oversight process and how we got to where we are today. So over 25 years ago, we changed to the reactor oversight process from the SALT process, which was viewed as an inconsistent and highly subjective and lacking transparency, to a system where it was risk-informed. In the SECI that's listed there on the screen, and I apologize, there's going to be lots of words on these screens, and I'm not going to read every single one of them. But it talked about that, hey, there may be a case, we're putting in the ROP, but there may be a chance that, hey, we need to right size the ROP in the future because we're taking our best shot at what the baseline level inspection will be. Next slide, please. Okay, this is really lots of words, but I want to go through some major things that happened in the ROP and changes we made along the way. So again, I just talked about April 2000, placed the ROP in place. There was a couple of demo sites where we demonstrated that it would work. Commission said, hey, you may need to make some changes to this in the future. 2001, 9/11 occurred, and we had to make a major change for security oversight. In fact, we took security oversight out of the ROP at that point. Another major event, 2002, where we made some major corrections to the ROP, in fact, added to it, was the Davis-Besse reactor vessel head degradation. 2003, we changed the performance indicators. We went from some safety system unavailability PIs to what we currently have in place today is the Mitigating Systems Performance Index. 2006, Cross-Cutting Issues Program had a major revision to it where we placed safety culture into the Cross-Cutting Issues Program. 2012, added security back into the ROP. And then comes 2013, which is the first time we looked at a major revision to the ROP for ROP enhancement. Next slide, please. And that did not go anywhere to make major changes, except that we got direction from the Commission to look at independent assessment of the ROP. We call it internally the McDermott report because that's the person who led the effort. And I want to highlight two recommendations out of that report, Recommendation 5 and Recommendation 6, because we're going to come back to these. Recommendation 5 starts to talk about white violations and how much time we're spending on white violations, adjudicating them. It was never a vision back in 2000 that, white violations at that time were low to moderate safety significance. We have since changed that to low significance. And it wasn't expected, it'd be expected that there would be lots of white violations. That's not the case. Second one is the Cross-Cutting Issues Program. Again, a recommendation to evaluate that. We'll come back to that theme again. 2015, so we did take a look at the Cross-Cutting Issues Program and we changed it because, again, we were spending lots of time on cross-cutting issues on the determining what the various aspects were, when that was really not the right focus we wanted to be. We moved away and increased the limits on the amount of aspects that a licensee could get. Next slide, please. Okay, 2016, here's the recurring theme. We changed how many whites a licensee could get before they went into a the degraded cornerstone of the action matrix. We eliminated mid-cycle assessments. That was just less administration. And then 2018, we did another chance at ROP enhancement. We submitted a very large SECI to the Commission, SECI 190067, had 10 enclosures to it. As it turned out, it was just too much in one place for the Commission to actually work on. So you'll see that we pulled that back in the next slide. But I did want to talk about in 2019, this is the other theme, we introduced the very low safety significant issue resolution process, where now we're focusing on, hey, how much time are we spending on issues that are of very low safety significance, trying to resolve those. And that process put into place where we could document that, hey, we haven't come to a resolution, but we'll document it such that other inspectors know what the resolution was. So you can see on this slide, we withdrew the SECI 18, which is the revision to the engineering inspection program, and we withdrew the ROP enhancement paper. Next slide, please. We sent those back up as individual papers so the Commission could look at each individual thing one at a time. And the Commission did put into place several of our recommendations. We changed the engineering inspection program from a triennial program to a quadrennial program. We made some changes to PI&R. At one point, we were going to go to triennial. We decided to stay at biannual. And we made changes to the assessment process for how long a licensee needs to stay in an elevated column in the action matrix. Okay, so you can see the rest of this chart is where we are present day. The Advanced Act was issued. We did send up a SECI to the Commission as part of that Advanced Act. I'll get to that. And I think I've talked about the other issues on that slide. Next slide, please. Okay, so now I want to talk about how we went about developing the current proposed revision to the ROP. So we did assemble a 20-person working group to look at all the oversight in the agency. So working on the Advanced Act, it didn't limit it to the reactor oversight process. It was for all agency oversight. So we had teams from all the offices looking at how they could make changes to oversight and inspection. We requested input from the staff. We tracked all that input. We resolved all the input on what we would go forth with and what we would save for later, because when we envisioned this back in the Advanced Act, we were not going to revise the baseline inspection program for the ROP right away, but there was lots of comments on the baseline inspection program. So we saved those for when we started that work. And you can see that, so we had the engagement portal, we had presentations from regions, staff town halls, and we consolidated all that input. Next slide, please. And as it turned out, the input that we came up independently internally to the NRC, which basically started back when we did the ROP enhancement in 2019, the things that we didn't put into place out of that effort, we considered all that. And it kind of matched, what industry's thoughts were on how we could revise the reactor oversight process. So we knew we were in a good spot on the changes that we could make to make oversight more efficient for operating reactors. And you can see the examples on that slide. So there was, consensus that we needed to take a look at, basically do a comprehensive review of the reactor oversight process. Look at PI&R again, because we had made some changes to it, but we needed to take a harder look at the time dedicated to problem identification and resolution. Next slide, please. All right, so out of that effort, we made some quick hitting changes that we informed the Commission on. The first one was to go to minimum samples, which was actually a fairly big change in the ROP. We always inspected to nominal samples, which is basically doing more inspection that's necessary for the completion of the ROP. Going down to minimum samples from nominal was about a 15% reduction in the amount of inspection effort. We changed some other things on how we were doing team inspections, changed the engineering inspection, changed how we're doing entrance and exit meetings, and not duplicating licensee event report inspection. Next slide, please. Still going on with changes, we stopped dual path processing for traditional enforcement violations and processing them through the ROP also for issues that are green. We used to do that just to make sure that we were taking a look at how that would fit in the ROP. Saved time for traditional enforcement violations. Put out some revised guidance on documentation requests to licensees so they wouldn't have to spend more effort on that. And we expanded the very low safety significant issue resolution process from just issues with licensing basis questions to basically everything that has a regulatory question that we can't resolve. Next slide, please. And we still have a couple other changes to issue. We're waiting on issuing these for the guidance we'll issue for the revision to the baseline inspection program. Next slide, please. All right, so we also had some recommendations to the commission in that SECI that we issued, 250045. These have since been all approved, and we have implemented these. For some of them, the guidance still needs to catch up. But you can see again, white findings has a recurring theme now. If a licensee gets a white finding, they're going no more than in column 2 of the action matrix, no matter how many white findings they get. In the history of the ROP, it's not a whole lot. So we felt comfortable, again, keeping column 2 of the action matrix as white findings only. And we're also giving licensees credit when they find their own issues that rise to the level of white. Cross-cutting issues program made a major revision down from the 23 aspects down to the 3 areas of human performance, problem identification and resolution, and safety conscious work environment. And lastly, we're going to spend less time on writing licensee operator exams and let the licensees do that as they can today. Next slide. Okay, back, so when we got that SRM back from the SECI we sent up to the commission in June of 2025, they said, okay, we know you're sending up another SECI on the revision to the baseline inspection program. Make sure it is data-based and well substantiated for the recommendations you're going to provide us for revising the baseline inspection program. So next slide, please. So this is the data we use. This SECI is public. I'll talk about the SECI number at the end of this presentation. But you can see the ROP versus industry performance, starting from the year 2000, going through the year 2024, because that's the last time we had assembled the data for these slides. And as you break it off, going back to 2000 to 2004 as the grouping, and then 2020 to 2024, you can see that there are substantial changes in things that we would use to evaluate how a licensee is doing in the ROP. First one is Reactor scrams. Next is accident sequence precursor events. So they both had significant reductions. Next slide, please. Next is greater than green performance indicators. So when the ROP first started out in 2000, there was lots of greater than green performance indicators. They've gone down to an average of 2 over the past 4 years. And in fact, 2022 was the first year we did not have a greater than green performance indicator. And lastly, greater than green findings. You can see there's a significant decrease in findings that are greater than green. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is the last slide for my presentation. I'm not going to talk about the recommendations that were in for revising the baseline inspection program. They are in that SECI 260014, which was issued on February 6th. At the same point, we issued a SECI to revise the security and force on force programs. That was issued on February 3rd. But you can see the proposed reductions in oversight from where we were in the beginning of 2025 and where we're winding up in the recommendations to the Commission. So the overall reduction is a 38% reduction in ROP in the oversight. And again, some of that reduction, 15%, was just going from nominal samples down to minimal samples. And we explain that in the SECI itself. Next slide. Okay, now I'm going to turn it over to Gerond.
Can you guys hear me okay? Just want to make sure my voice is low, so sometimes the mic doesn't pick it up. But I was going to say one thing. I didn't know I needed to write a joke today. But over in NMSS, we don't have the budget to write jokes. That was a good one. Just made that up. Okay, so good afternoon, guys, and good to see a lot of you guys again. Again, I'm Gerond George. I've inspected at some of your facilities. I've worked with some of my colleagues over here. So again, it's always good to see you guys. So today I'm just going to highlight, can we go to the next slide, please, Christian? I'm going to highlight a few of the enhancements that we've made in our 4 business lines in our inspection programs over in NMSS. Again, those business lines are fuel facilities, storage, transportation. Did I say fuel facilities already? I don't know if I did. Decommissioning and our nuclear materials users group. I'll go over a few things that we did report in our July 2025 letter to Congress. I'll discuss the few changes to our inspection programs, the efficiencies we've gained, how we use risk and performance insights on the basis of these changes. I'll discuss our work toward efficient and consistent reporting and tracking. I'll also provide a few examples of how we've increased our risk tolerance, but not decreased our safety standards. And then I'll talk a little bit about our future activities that we plan. But before I do move forward, I do want to acknowledge that both the Advance Act and the executive order just work to accelerate a lot of the work that we were already doing. We were on a long journey toward efficient, risk-informed, predictable oversight in NMSS for a long time. Going back, it started maybe in about 2007. We started looking at risk in our inspection programs. We published dry cask storage, PRA, methodology in 2007. We recently updated that in 2024 with a level 3 PRA for that activity. We're going to plan on using that to provide more insight and to inform our regulatory and policy decision making. In 2020 and 2021, our spent fuel storage program and our fuel facility inspection program both implemented efficiencies to reduce direct inspection hours and frequencies, which focused our inspections on the most safety and risk significant activities. Now, from 20 to 2023, our materials inspection program created a phase 3 project working group that was comprised of NRC personnel and our agreement state members. And they revised 10 inspection procedures and the program document to incorporate new risk and performance insights, introducing a concept of what's called the risk module, a concept of focused inspection on areas that present higher risk or is expected to effectively reduce risk to health, safety, and security. So again, you've seen we've done a lot of work, but I'll go over a few things, but I do want you guys to remember one thing from our presentation for materials, is that we are and we always have been looking for a path to smarter oversight with the same safety focus. Next slide, please. So Phil talked about his working groups. As soon as the Advance Act was signed into law, we stood up an Advance Act working group, and it had subgroups for every different business line that I talked about there. We performed these self-assessments. We held these inspector town halls. We saw input from other regulatory agencies, input from you guys out there, our external stakeholders. And we came up around 250 to 300 different ideas and comments that we worked through. Those ideas range from saving travel costs to major inspection program changes. So the act itself accelerated those greater long-term activities that we were already working on, but it also provided us an opportunity to take several small wins along the way. Completing these actions created a sense that our larger goals would be achievable. Individually, these improvements were small, but added together, they turned into large savings. And I'll talk about a few of them here. So for our materials licensees, you see the first item on the slide where it's centralizing our inspection data and for efficient inspection and travel planning. We've been creating dashboards over the years, but we really focused some efforts on creating a good dashboard that we could use for our inspection and travel planning, specifically for our materials licensees. As some of you guys know, our inspectors, they'll pick an area to go inspect. We go look in this tool now to determine what inspections are due in that area that we're going to inspect, and then we move forward there. You know, individually, it's probably just about an hour of saving, but in materials inspection programs, we do 500 to 600 inspections a year. So that's about 700 hours that we're saving just doing that activity. We talked about entrance and exit meetings earlier. We made those optional, just like they did in the ROP. That's one of the things that I think we learned during COVID, during the pandemic. But I did have a joke here. I did write a joke. I think we figured out that some of those meetings could have been an email. No, not funny? All right, thanks. All right, so hybrid inspections, that's something that we really focused on that we implemented very well during the pandemic. I remember being an engineering inspection and I had to go to Callaway and we had to end our inspection during COVID there. And so, you know, using this hybrid inspection model, we are saving on travel, 20 hours, up to 20 hours per inspection, just for travel. Our ISFSI inspections, we did a small change where we reduced our nominal hours, 96 hours, down to 80 hours. We do around 54 inspections a year. And so we looked at that. It's going to reduce about 640 hours per year for the entire fleet. And then for fuel facilities, one of the things that we're doing is that we found we found better ways to communicate with our public at our annual licensee performance review meetings. We found that we decided that if the performance of the licensee is good, we would find other means to communicate that performance instead of traveling to have a public meeting and we're sending 5 or 6 NRC personnel to a site or location and the planning for that activity. We decided, again, we could communicate that good performance either via social media, press releases, or other opportunities, even virtually. We've had virtual meetings. And we're estimating that's going to save around 240 hours per year for the fuel facility inspection program. Next slide, please. So based on the feedback from our stakeholders and the performance history of our inspections, we identified and implemented additional efficiencies focusing our inspection effort commensurate with risk significance. So bottom line is we're focusing where the safety impact is higher, informed by site conditions and performance history. And I'll just go over a few activities that we're planning here. So in decommissioning, we've had this in our program for a while, but now we're going to start reinforcing this with our inspection staff. We are going to make decisions to either extend or reduce an inspection interval based on what risk significant activities are going to be there on site. So there may be years that we're supposed to go somewhere every 3 years. We may extend that now to every 4 years or every 5 years. Again, we're also looking at this approach, we're weighing it against what activities are going on at the site and what the public interest is in the area. And for fuel facilities in 2026, we're piloting a program right now at one of our fuel facilities where we adjusted the inspection hours at that fuel facility. So we made this decision based on changes to that facility's integrated safety analysis. We basically saw that there were going to be less samples for us to be able to choose from for that inspection, and so we determined that maybe we could have a lower inspection input, lower inspection footprint, at that site. But we do reserve the right to increase that inspection, again, if significant issues do turn up during those inspections. And again, during spent fuel, one of the biggest changes that we made, and we found that it saved about 800 hours, is that we found parts of our inspection procedure that if we know that the licensee has completed those activities before and they've completed those activities well, we determine that we don't need to do an inspection at that site. And that inspection is for the expansion of what we call not important to safety foundations. Next slide, please. So the materials inspection report consistency. It's funny, we say it only took 20 years. So we updated Manual Chapter 0610, and that is our NMSS inspection report writing document. The last time that was updated, I believe, was in 2005 or 2006. And so we took a lead from our compadres over in ROP land, in Reactor's land, to use their systems to be able to identify, to be able to document inspection issues and inspection reports consistently. So basically what you're going to see, for those that have not seen that format yet, it's going to look like what we do over in our operating reactors right now. The reason why, we're using the same tracking program. We call it Reactor Program Systems, RPS. Again, that's where we are going to start tracking our issues moving forward, tracking the samples that we select during our inspections. We're going to be able to, now that we have this tracking system, we're going to be able to use data more efficiently for our fuel facility decommissioning and our spent fuel storage and transportation business lines. Our materials business line uses WBL, so you may have seen those forms of those reports associated with there. But what we see is, again, this is laying the groundwork for faster documentation, report consistency, faster disposition of our inspection issues, and making our data-driven decisions in the future. Next slide, please. VLISR. So Phil talked about VLISR a little bit. I won't really go into much of what VLISR is. I think everybody knows what that is. Hopefully you do. I do want to point to, we do have a few examples where we did use VLISR in the materials business lines this year. We used it in our decommissioning business line. This report that I have here on the screen shows 2 examples. We actually used it 3 times. So we are expanding the use of VLISR to our process. We first started implementing VLISR in the materials inspection programs in 2021. We've expanded it just like they have in reactors. We're looking at the ambiguity of all those issues with the licensing basis, design basis requirements, and the self-imposed standards. Our process for implementing VLISR is in Inspection Manual Chapter 0610, Appendix G. Let's see. Not much more to really talk about there. Let's go to the next slide, please. So one of the things that we take credit for with the ADVANCE Act is it's really getting us to start thinking about different ways to deal or disposition our inspection issues. And this is one of the things that we came up with back in last year. It took a long time to come up with this, by the way, but we did it in such a it took us about 2 months to come up with this process. We changed the enforcement policy, or made an addition to the enforcement policy, to figure out how to deal with issues associated with with general licensees adopting certificate of compliance holders changes under 7248. And specifically, how do we deal with issues when those COC holder changes actually introduce a non-compliance? So in the development of this interim enforcement policy, one of the things that we wanted to look at or make sure we focus on was focus the enforcement on the party best positioned to correct the issue. We felt this would be a good way to reduce these long-standing perception of double jeopardy in the program. Previously, we had a lot of inspection issues. Once we would find that inspection finding at a general licensee, we may issue that same or a similar inspection finding at the CLC holder and vice versa. So the approach we took, it reflects lessons learned from about 20 years of friction with that rule. We have used it the most, I would say, and you might have seen it recently in some of your reports at our reactor facilities that are co-located with ISFCs with the continuous basket shim issue in the multi-purpose canisters. I think we used the interim enforcement policy 20 times last year to close out that long-standing issue without having to go through, without the general licensees having to go through the extra steps of going and getting exemptions or other activities that come in compliance with that rule. But I do want to say we're not relaxing the requirements. It was just smarter enforcement. We just needed to set clear expectations for our general licensees and COC holders, and we targeted the corrective action ownership to the right entity. Next slide, please. So lastly, I'll talk about our path to inspection excellence. This is our next phase of implementing our Advanced Act activities. One of my staff came up with that name, Path to Inspection Excellence, because that's where we want to be. We know we are taking this long journey, this long path toward getting to a point where we are doing smarter oversight, smarter enforcement. And so we're going to do a few activities to make that happen. To start out, though, we are working toward completing those activities. This includes additional self-assessments where we're going to gauge the effectiveness of our enhancements. The information in those self-assessments will provide input into the future efforts to update and re-baseline each of our inspection programs. Also, we're expanding some of the principles from Executive Order 14300 that are similar to the actions that are going on in the reactor oversight process. More specifically, we are exploring ways right now to be able to improve the speed in which we screen issues through our enforcement process. So what do all these changes mean? So our staff lead for that path to inspection excellence gave a few takeaways in a recent public meeting. He's here, and I'm actually stealing it from him. But it's okay, because I'm his supervisor. And I'm just going to repeat them. In NMSS, our safety focus is unchanged. Risk-informed does not mean less safe, it means better safety focus. Oversight is concentrated on important to safety structure, system, and components and items with higher impacts to safety. The process that we're developing and that we have developed is clear and it's more predictable with streamlined inspection procedures, V-lister expansion, and the interim enforcement policy. So it's helping us close out these very low safety issues quickly and aim the enforcement at the right entity. Lastly, we're going to continue to engage with you guys, our public. We're going to try to do it early, and we're going to try to do it a lot so you guys can stay informed of the changes that we are making, and then you guys understand that we have a clear path to safe, timely outcomes. In NMSS, we're going with the motto, it's going to be the same safety, but it's smarter oversight. That's the path we're taking. Thank you.
All right, hello. So my name is Tim Riti. I'm a Director of Regulatory Affairs at the Nuclear Energy Institute. I focus mainly in compliance. I chair the Reactor Oversight Process Task Force. And next slide. And the three things I really wanted to cover today is associated with what is the Reactor Oversight Process Task Force and what does it do? NEI and industry response to the Advance Act Section 507 and Executive Order 14300, and just some things looking ahead. But before I get started, I just wanted to take a moment to thank Phil for coordinating this panel, my fellow panelists, Gerard and Michael, to support, and those that coordinated, Eric and others. It's just been an amazing morning for me and day so far, so I'm really having a good time here, so I just want to say thank you there. I don't have a joke for you, but that's okay because I'm not from the federal government, so I really am here to help. All right, next slide. Okay, so I'm going to talk first, just give you an overview of the Reactor Oversight Process Task Force. So, you know, we are the focal point for the industry interface with the NRC on ROP implementation and proposed changes. We interface monthly or bi-monthly at public meetings. We come in with suggestions, ideas, and thoughts and bounce those off of the NRC staff. And over the years since the creation of the ROP, a lot of work has been done by the Reactor Oversight Process Task Force. I've been privileged to chair the task force since about the year 2021, 2022 mainly, which, as you all know, a lot of exciting changes ahead. But when I look back to the year 2000, that timeline that Phil shared with us earlier, there was a lot of work each year up until that time frame with ideas, suggestions from the industry, from the NRC staff, from those out in the regions that are doing the inspectors day to day. And at those times, some of those ideas just weren't ready to move forward, and they didn't. So anyway, the ROP task force and the interface with NRC is to me, crucial to get us where we are today. So I look forward to leading that team, and you know, that team is made up of industry leaders in the regulatory and compliance areas across the operating fleet. They represent all of the U.S. nuclear power plants. We have points of contacts that are knowledgeable in probabilistic risk assessment and risk-informing concepts and approaches. They're the folks at the station that provides making sure that the stations are ready for inspections, and then to deal with the outcomes of those inspections and anything like findings or anything that comes out in the station's response. And a strong interface with security, emergency preparedness, radiation protection, and other areas of inspections at our nuclear power plants. So excellent, knowledgeable, you know, kind of call them the regulatory conscience of the stations, but truly everyone across the stations has a regulatory conscience. It's just these are the folks that are making sure that every day that's being discussed. So the other couple of things I guess I want to mention is we do monitor how the reactor oversight process is being implemented across the fleet. We share any concerns or ideas or maybe misconceptions with the NRR staff, the program office, just to get that out there, just to have the discussion. We've seen changes made from that, and we've had to self-correct in areas where maybe we just didn't understand initially when something was implemented. So we share those inspections, lessons learned across the industry and with the NRC. And then there's the performance indicators, and Phil put a graph up. There are certain performance indicators that's used to monitor for reactor assessment program, and we control the guiding document on implementation, and we work closely with NRC for any changes we make to performance indicators, thresholds, or how to implement. There's a process called the frequently asked questions. Quite a few of those have been implemented since beginning of the ROP to really clarify and understand how to assess a performance indicator, and I will say over the last 3 or 4 years there's only been a handful. So I think everyone kind of understands what the criteria is. But that's what NEI does with the industry associated with the ROP task force. Next slide. All right, so I wanted to talk a little about the response to both the Advance Act, Section 507, and the executive order. So this was really our moment to go back, dust off all those previous recommendations. Many, as I mentioned, were made by the industry. Many were made by NRC inspectors and staff based on their experience out in the field conducting inspections and understanding the programs and the data behind it. And I thought Phil did a nice job ensuring that it was a data-informed set of recommendations that went to the commission that reflected improvements made across industry performance that helped justify some of the changes that were being proposed. So when the Advance Act first came out, NEI, working with a group of the industry folks, many from the ROP Task Force and others, we actually developed about 39 recommendations that we wanted to get in front of the NRC, so when they were responding to the Advance Act, they had some more information to review. So we sent a letter. I did include the ML numbers. You can look those up in NRC Adams if you'd like. But I just wanted to point out a few things on the Advance Act response first. We focused on two overarching principles for oversight and inspection. One was getting very low safety significant issues resolved rapidly, efficiently, not spending a lot of time on things, and I think both Phil and Gerond talked a little bit about that. And then secondly, just looking at the baseline inspection program for efficiencies, looking for areas of overlap, looking for duplication, looking where maybe just is there value added in the inspections that we're getting? Does the data reflect that there's a need to continue in this area, or should a more risk-informed approach occur? And we were able to submit that to the NRC, and we were actually very pleased to see some of the ideas that came out in the paper, which was SECI 240045. Excuse me, 250045. Anyway, and many of those matched up in what we recommended in our letter. So going on to the Accelerated NRC Reform Report, this is again another set of recommendations with the industry to address the Executive Order 14300. This document had over 100 recommendations looking at over 1,000 regulations, policies, and supporting guidance, and I'd say about 30 of those recommendations were focused specifically to oversight and inspection program. In the area of risk-informed, performance-based framework, I mentioned the value-based inspection. We had some additional ideas on areas to focus, streamlining maybe the number of security inspections, how they're conducted, looking at risk-based sampling, how the resident inspector is being used. It's important to note that every nuclear power plant across the United States has 2 resident inspectors on site. And they have quite a bit of oversight and activities that they do. They're in the control room nearly every morning. I spent 27 years in the industry at a nuclear power plant. I've interfaced with probably every inspection, or at least as I moved up in the organization, the debriefs and the inspection results, and got to see and knew the resident inspectors very well because they were everywhere all the time. And then the regional inspectors would come in and they would do their inspections. So we're talking about a 38% reduction in overall direct inspection hours as part of the paper that's in front of the commission now. But I will tell you that every area, it continues to be inspected. It's just focusing the attention, streamlining those to be still effective but more efficient, and then reducing some of that duplication and overlap that I mentioned. So I think the paper is in really good shape. There was cases in which, in both recommendations, the NRC staff went even beyond what we recommended. And I'll give you an example. The licensee identified white finding no longer requiring a column change in action matrix. That's a great recommendation. It really incentivizes licensees to go out and find and fix their issues, and it will pay big dividends. And that came from the NRC staff recommendations. There were other areas we wish they may have looked a little bit further. We think there were still some opportunities with certain inspections, maybe the cross-cutting issue program on how it's rolled out. However, they did take a major step, in our opinion, to streamline and make those processes more efficient and still be effective. Let's see, next slide. All right, so I just want to talk a little bit about looking ahead. So this is really a lot of things that the Reactor Oversight Process Task Force will continue to do. We'll continue to be engaged during the public meetings, and we know the NRC staff still has some work in front of them as far as looking at ways to improve the Reactor Oversight process. So the first thing on the list there is complete assessment of the Reactor Oversight performance indicators. We know that the performance indicators have various levels of overlap with either other performance indicators or through direct inspection. And if you think about the year 2000 and you think about today, the amount of information, the amount of data, the use of technology, the way that information's made readily available, do you really need a performance indicator, especially if it takes a lot of effort on the industry side to produce, and then on the NRC side to inspect, and is that data already available through just, small samples? So that's something that we're looking at and working with NRC staff on. The other item I want to mention was the other areas of ROP reform. We know that part of the initial briefings was they wanted to look at the supplemental inspection program. These are inspections that are conducted if you have, say, a greater than green issue. So if you're in another column of the action matrix, you'll get a supplemental inspection. That level of supplemental inspection is based on the safety significance of the issue. We know that there was some work done in those areas, but I think even Phil mentioned that the amount of effort and time to address a white finding seemed to be a lot more than what was originally anticipated. And also the fact that there's not as many as maybe what was predicted to have early on in the Reactor Oversight process. When it does happen, it seems like it takes even more rigor because they don't happen quite as often. But we are still dealing with what's considered a low safety significant issue. So that's one area that we're looking forward to working with the NRC and providing comments during the public meetings. And then the third bullet there is, and you heard it during the plenary sessions, you heard it throughout, the wholesale regulatory review. There is quite a bit of things currently coming out and will be coming out, and we're geared up to support reviews with the industry. And the ROP task force is a key contributor to that because, again, these are compliance experts. These are folks that know the regulations, that live the regulations, and they're going to be able to help comment on proposed changes to those regulations. So looking forward to that activity. And then finally, there's a lot of change relative, considering if you look at it from the beginning of the Reactor Oversight process, right? This is the biggest change that we've seen in the program since its inception. So what does that mean? There's going to be learnings. There's going to be lessons learned. There's going to be implementation questions. There's going to be probably issues, and stations aren't going to be as prepared as they probably should have for an inspection initially. NRC staff may go in and look differently than what the intent of the inspection is, and we want to be able to share that and have that open dialogue with the NRC staff on those inspections, lessons learned. So with that, that's all I had, so thank you very much.
Good afternoon, and I appreciate the invitation to come and speak a bit to materials improvements and right-sizing the inspection program. The good news is, the bad news is I have a raft of slides. The good news is I'm not going to read them as a script. So don't get antsy about time approaching to go to cocktails. I do want to ask a question at the start. Is there anyone here who has any anxiety about the coming release of regulations in the materials area? Anybody? No. There's one. How many people are excited that there are new regulations that are coming out? A couple of raised hands. Want to point out that anxiety and excitement release the same endorphins through your system. So if you're not really excited about them coming out, shift your focus. Anything we see in those regulations that come out that we don't like, don't suffer anxiety about them. Get excited about the opportunity to engage with the NRC to change them, and engage with your industry partners to change them. Because, going back to the chairman's talk this morning, the chairman's goal number 3 was sustained improvement. So we should all look forward to be part of that. And so that's the first comment I need to make about this materials point of view that I'm about to enter into. I don't want to bury a lead in a summary slide, but I want to state something that's obvious. This is the best chance this agency has ever had, including in the materials realm. And it's the best chance this industry has ever had to get things in order with respect to risk. And that includes its inspection program, and that includes its regulations. It's a shame those regulations weren't released before this conference, because we'd have a better idea of how they match up. You have to know what you're going to inspect, and you're going to have to know how many resources you need to inspect when you know the regulations. Fortunately, all the discussion so far indicates it's going to be on the right track. I don't think they would have garnered the efficiencies unless they were ready to have the regulations to back them up. For the regulated community, when we see the reduced program and we see these regulations, can't afford to relax our efforts. The little things at the base of our activities towards safety will still be the most important things, and we build up from there to produce safety. Enough of that. Where are we? Next slide, please. They're right in front of me, but that's small print. The next, at least for me, the next several slides detail the journey that NMSS has had in risk informing its regulatory, its regulations and its regulatory framework and outlook. I want to point out number 2 and 3 real briefly. NMS, Division of Fuel Management, Division of Spent Fuel, had what they used to call a RegCon. And that slide from the January 15th meeting is in actual existence somewhere. And the next slide says that the next bullet says what that slide presented. An articulation of risk that was put together. I won't say calculated, I won't say statistically derived, because I think the reason we've never seen it again is because it didn't stand the test of strict statistical verification at the time. But it puts us in a ballpark that we can use as recognizing the extremely low risk of the mission of passive spent fuel storage. Next slide, please. And you'll see the next to last slide. We need an articulation of what that risk is as we change to help with our right sizing and vision of the inspection program and in compiling the regulations. How would we do that? Well, standing here today, my suggestion would be dig up that slide, look at what the suspect data was, or the non-statistical data was, and let's come up with an articulated, a solid articulation of what the real risks are. We can do that in the C of C world as well. We can do it in the fuel facilities world as well. We can do it through decommissioning, which has proven to be extraordinarily safe as we had as we complete the decommissionings of the current efforts that went on after the premature closings. So I would think that anybody that thinks I'd ever suggest that there be an ROP for any of these activities is welcome to come up here and drag me off the stage. But we do need a way to articulate what the really low risk is. Next slide. These are all good faith, solid efforts on the part of NMSS to risk inform its regulations. And there's a few in there that are specialized toward the Decommissioning Plant Coalition mission, et cetera. But they reflect, it's not as if NMSS hasn't tried. The chairman today was asked, how come it didn't work when you... Well, it's not for the want of trying, and the same thing is true in NMSS. Next slide. Next slide. And I'll stop here for two. Gerond mentioned the COVID. He was at Callaway. I was at a Nationals Yankees exhibition game in West Palm Beach. And I thought with the number of people that were there that day, as we found out what was circulating around, that I was a dead man. I wasn't going to survive. So, but just after that started, Bruce Montgomery from NEI, I saw you around earlier and hope you're out there somewhere. If not, Bruce Montgomery and I were contacted by Andrea Cook, who was then the Division of Fuel Management Director, and said, we've got to work out exemptions, templates to use because we won't be able to do our inspection program the way we are currently doing it. And aside from developing wise ways to deal with COVID, we also found out that there might be wise ways of dealing with inspections in a different way or with a different view toward the risk the activities viewed. It opened a door. The next one I want to talk to is the VLISR process. And I think that, I think that the VLISR process is a great improvement, and particularly the slide that they showed about enforcement discretion. The problem with VLISR, and I hope we can work more on it, is that once you find that there's a compliance issue, it tends to begin a discussion of you can't use VLISR or why you can't. It's a compliance issue. Now, I think what the staff intends to do from this point forward is to initiate within themselves a discussion of post-event, looking at whether or not this is a regulatory issue that should remain, that maybe we need to change the regulations. The Decommissioning Plant Coalition has suggested no, before you issue the violation, if it's such low safety significance, before you do that, please review whether or not that should be a real violation, an actual regulation. Those of you in the, who work at different facilities know that when you get a violation, even if it's an unsighted severity level 4, it's still a violation. And to differing levels or differing responses at different companies, you still have to write up why there was a violation internally and explain ourselves. So we hope that that can be moved up the chain as a requirement in VLISR. Next slide. There was a showcase that NMSS held last month, and it was very, very informative, and it gave rise to a great deal of optimism. If you missed it, it's a lot of what Gerond just outlined for us, but there were other materials, business lines that were discussed, and those discussions lead to a great deal of optimism on how this process is going to merge with the regulations process. We'll need to carefully review. We're going to have to do it quickly. There's an old saying from a Hall of Fame basketball coach who won a lot of national championships. Be quick. Don't be in a hurry as we do this. Carefully consider the comments we're going to make. Make sure the make sure the inspection program and the guidance that follows it match the intent of the regulations. Make sure they're important because they're only going to be receiving in that 30-day comment period. They only want to receive those truly significant comments that we may make. So let's be quick. Let's not be in a hurry, but let's identify the most important ones. Next slide. These are just some of the recommendations the Decommissioning Plant Coalition. Some of you know us affectionately as the Dead Plant Society. But these are some of the recommendations, small and great, that we've made over the past 13 months, 14 months. Next slide. And I think that with respect to this one, the spirit is there in what Gerond said earlier about giving credit for good performance, if you will. And so they're getting there. We're getting there, sorry. Next slide. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on 7248. I think we need a new process in 7248, but that's a personal opinion. It's a DPC opinion too, I think. But there are other views on this about tweaking 7248. We'll have to see what the regulations say in 7248's revision, and if we made it, hopefully we've made some progress. But I think we need to make 7248 to be a process that's a bit different from 5059 in that it would embrace the low, low, low level of risk. Said that one before. Next slide. Most of the materials area is fertile for great improvement, and we hope that we can. We remain optimistic that we build upon this era of enthusiasm and excitement, and we ask the NRC not to prove us wrong, and let's not all of us let this historic opportunity go by as well. Next slide. Oh, this is just, you can read that later. That's just for me. I appreciate the time spent with you, and again, I appreciate the invitation and look forward to any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Okay, so there's a reminder that you can submit questions via the QR code. We have a bunch of questions in the queue, and we'll start asking those right now. So the first question I'll take, there's a question on Will there be a report that assembles a summary of level of savings from all of these efforts? And I will say, if you go for the ROP, if you go into the SECI 2016-0014, we describe in detail the proposed savings to Oversight for the ROP.
You want me to answer for NMSS? Yeah. Sure. So we are creating a report. We probably need to talk to our management if we want to make a report with the savings, but we know out of all the ideas that we have, we know every hour that we propose on saving. So that wouldn't be a big stretch for us to make that report.
Next question's for Tim Riti. Tim, reevaluating the cross-cutting issues program is one of your key bullet points. From the industry perspective, what has been the biggest pain point with how it was previously run?
Yeah, thanks, Phil. That's a great question. When you look at the cross-cutting issue program before the most recent SECI was approved, whenever there was a performance deficiency and say, a very low safety significant finding, green finding, it would get binned into one of those three aspects and one of the 23 attributes associated with those three aspects. As a reminder, that was problem identification, resolution, human performance, or safety conscious work environment. And very few things get in the safety conscious work environment for obvious reasons. That's a big deal to have things fall into that place. So they would be getting those two aspects mainly. But then you had all those 23 attributes that, is it conservative bias? Is it complacency? Is it, where is it? There was a lot of effort being performed by the NRC inspectors to bin those items, and then the licensee would probably have already put something in their corrective action program and binned it. Then it opens up the potential of having a disagreement, and it just put a lot of extra work in. And I was really appreciative of the staff's report out at one of the public meetings on the recommendations to the cross-cutting issue program when it was being recommended, that the trends are not even there to really defend the need to have such a rigorous program. So that's where most of the effort was, trying to figure out where to bin this performance deficiency of a very low safety significant issue into one of 23 attributes.
Thanks, Tim. Next question is for Gerond, and I can probably answer it also. Will there be further reductions of inspections based on trends observed in RPS?
I guess I'm not sure about the trends observed in RPS, but we are looking. We've got to do some self-assessments to determine, again, what's the right size, what's the right footprint we want for this type of inspection. We do have the tools available that we can go in, find those most safety significant activities, and put more of our resources there, and then on the other side, see where the other ones fall out. Currently doing that right now for our fuel facility inspection program. We have a huge group together trying to determine how often do we need to go on site. We consolidated one of our inspections, permanent plant mods inspections. Actually, it was 2 inspections. We were doing that annually and on a triennial basis. So we were basically doing it at those 10 facilities once per year. And we decided that was too much. So yeah, there'll most likely be a reduction from these activities.
And the only thing I can offer on the Reactor Oversight side of this is once we implement the new changes to the ROP, we had the Reactor Oversight self-assessment process, and we'll evaluate those changes after a certain amount of time of implementation, and we'll make adjustments to the process where we see we need to make adjustments to the ROP. Next question is for Mike Callahan. Mike, for sites currently in safe storage, what does a sharply reduced level of inspection actually look like in your ideal scenario?
I won't tell the joke I told earlier, but anyway, about going out once a year with a friend of mine and visiting Yucca Mountain and calling back and say, yep, everything's okay. And that would be about it after it all got filled up. But I think that for an SFSI whose sole mission is passive storage, you're almost down to a long interval aging management process. Everything else would fall into event reporting. If somebody somebody rolled up to the gate and, you'd report it and, make sure that there was appropriate action taken. But for standalone SFSIs, I think you're almost down to long interval aging management inspections. For the SFSIs that are on site for the decommissioning plants, et cetera, there's a little added problem with being adjacent to perhaps the operating reactors from the point of view of security, traffic, et cetera, those sorts of things. So it would be, there should be an inspection module for that, for those facilities. But for decommissioning plants where everything has gone into dry cask storage, that level should be, again, pretty much consistent with this standalone SFSIs.
Thanks, Mike. Next question's for me, and Gerond may want to offer some insights also. Could you please speak to the utility of written staff justification for the ROP changes? To what extent was the clarity provided by this document as a reference with the time and effort to produce it? So what I'll talk about is changes to the ROP and what level of engagement we need with the commission. So we have guidance as a staff of what changes we can make to the ROP without discussing with the commission, what level of changes we can make by just informing the commission, and what changes need to be approved by the commission. So I think this question gets into that. So major recommendation or major changes to the ROP would require commission engagement, and that's what we did with this SECI going up to the commission for the baseline inspection program. As it turns out, the SECI that we sent to the commission in June of 2025, the SRM came back from that to ask the staff to revise that guidance in that the commission no longer would need to approve changes to the ROP after these two papers that just got sent up, the one for the baseline inspection program and the one for the force on force security program. We could just inform the commission of changes we make and have a hold period in case the commission would need to engage. So we are sharply reducing in the future the amount of written product we need to create to revise, make a change to the ROP that would have required commission engagement. I don't think, Gerond, you can offer it, but I don't think NMSS has that same engagement.
No, we don't have the same engagement. The engagement model that you're going to is the level of engagement we are at in NMSS right now.
Next question's for you, Tim. How does NEI envision AI shaping the future operating environment for the nuclear industry, and what actions is it taking now to prepare members for that transition?
Wow, AI is getting pretty much involved with everything now. And, being out of the industry for a little while, I still hear some of the things that stations are doing with predictive monitoring and use of artificial intelligence. And I really think we're just scratching the surface. So I know that there's plants that actually run plant parameters through a program, and it can actually somewhat predict where the next equipment issue might be coming from based on a bunch of data that a system engineer, just a cursory review of their health report and a handful of data may not be able to predict, because you got a lot of other information that goes into that. So that's just one example on how it's being used. Now, this question was a little broader than that, and it's kind of looking ahead. We are doing a lot of work at NEI with the use of artificial intelligence, including working with other partners with just various ways that it can be used through operating experience, through knowledge transfer, through other things. I'm not the expert in that area, but I do see a role of artificial intelligence being used more and more in maybe inspection, evaluation, preps. I know the NRC has been talking about using it, and I think there's maybe even on Thursday afternoon there's an AI a session that's going to occur. But it's coming, and NEI is in the middle of it, so we're looking forward to seeing what we do with it. So thanks.
This question's for the entire panel, and I'll answer first. For the whole panel, are there any activities looking to address transportable nuclear power plants and other mobile applications that will require adaptive inspection and oversight requirements? Sorry, there is an additional question which I'll answer at the same time, talking about advanced reactor oversight. So we are currently, developed is the advanced reactor construction oversight process, which will be put in place for reactors that are advanced reactors that are under construction. One of the next actions that we'll need to undertake in NRR is developing the operating advanced reactor oversight process. So this question kind of lends it to that. For microreactors that will be mobile, how will they fit into the advanced reactor oversight process? And that is future work that the NRC needs to undertake. The construction of those will fit into the construction program that has already been developed.
And so for the materials program, we're working closely with our partners over in NRR in development of a potential microreactor inspection program. I know right now we've been really focused on the licensing of those. That's where most of the action is right now. But we've also been thinking about, okay, where would we be able to inject ourselves? Maybe that's the wrong term, but where do we need to be in the process of microreactor manufacturing, development, and operation? And so for our business lines, we know we're going to be in a Part 70 and fuel facilities for fuel. We've got to look at our Part 71 because it's transportation, right? And so we've been communicating, working with our partners over in NRR for at least the last year, trying to determine what that's going to look like.
All right, so that's an interesting question, because I've seen almost that exact same question come across like my email recently at NEI. I do know that we have folks heavily involved in the advanced reactor community, including or decommissioning folks and transport. We have a lot of regulatory expertise at NEI, and that is something that we know is on folks' minds, and that's something I know that we're working on. I don't have any specifics, but I know that that question is out there. Mm-hmm.
The only thing that I would say is that we need to make sure we articulate the risk of what we're going to have to regulate. Look, we did a great job with spent fuel storage. We built a mousetrap that would never fail. But let's make sure as we approach the transportation of microreactors, we keep the risk of that transportation well understood and well articulated.
This next question's for Tim. A lot of attention has been spent on actions NRC is taking to reduce resource expenditure. What has the industry done, or what could the industry do to help reduce the level of effort spent by both NRC and licensees on potentially white findings?
Okay, I think I understand the question. Well, I think find the issue if you're at a station. We just heard from Phil in the recent approved commission paper that a license to identify white finding will not cause a change in the action matrix and will get a different level of inspection and not require necessarily a 9511 supplemental inspection. So go out and find and fix the issues. That's the first thing. Make sure that your robust programs are still finding and fixing those issues, and your corrective action program, which is a pillar of safe nuclear operations, is strong and continues to stay strong. So those are obviously the things that I think would help. But the other thing is, you're not going to find everything, and sometimes things happen. Have a robust corrective action program, do a good causal evaluation, and make sure that that stuff's available, so when it does come in and get inspected, you spend less time discussing it and more time just determining where it lands and going on. So that'd be my recommendation.
Thanks, Tim. I'll take these next two questions and feel free, panel, to weigh in on them. First one is, and they're both related. First question is, can you tell us when the inspection manual will be revised to reflect the recent ROP changes? And the second part of that is, when will the changes to the more than minor screening process be implemented? Will this change require a revision to every manual chapter 0609 appendix to incorporate the new more than minor screening questions? I'll answer the second question first. The answer is yes. So we've already developed those revisions to manual chapter 0609, and in fact, we've been working on the revisions to all the inspection procedures and all the manual chapters since we started this effort to revise the baseline inspection program in the fall of 2024. We can't issue those inspection procedures or manual chapters until we get the staff requirements memorandum from the commission to see if we need to make some further changes based on what the commission tells us to do. But as soon as we get the SRM, we'll start issuing the changes to the manual chapters and the inspection procedures, and in particular 0609, where we'll replace the new more than minor screening criteria in manual chapter 0609.
Now that's a great question, and that's something that the ROP task force has discussed when the proposed change to the program was issued. That was actually another one of those items that I mentioned earlier, that the staff actually went down a direction differently than what we recommended. Currently there was the list of what would be considered minor examples, and then you had the SDP that would go no further than a green finding if it was. But this is a whole new approach. The good thing about this approach is it takes something and gets it into the screening process, and it gets dispositioned through that. And the vision of the recommended changes is to get rid of the subjectivity that currently goes into determining if something is minor or more than minor. And we've seen regional differences on how the same issue may get dispositioned differently depending on which region or which inspector, and that's because of the subjectivity. However, we also know this is a pretty significant change in how that is being done, and with the examples that we saw when it was discussed during the public meetings, we're encouraged by the path forward, but we also see potential unintended consequences. So we're really interested in seeing that criteria when it comes out, and then as we implement it, and NRC staff uses it, make sure we're providing that feedback on how it's going.
And not to be left out from the materials world, we're closely monitoring the changes that they're making over in the ROP and their more than minor screening process, and seeing what we can take from that to inform how we're going to screen our issues in the future.
Okay, and I think this will be the final question as we're going to reach our time limit here. And the final question, Tim, goes to you. You plan to support public discussions on other areas of ROP reform. What is the best way for the public and stakeholders to engage in these discussions?
So I think the question is just talking about, in general, different elements of ROP reform. The ROP public meetings get scheduled pretty early on. The next one is on April 23rd. Anyone could join a public meeting and provide feedback and comments. I would say that if you're a member of the industry and you wanting to make sure your voice is heard, work and reach out to your ROP task force member from your utility, your company, your fleet. And if you don't feel like you have one, reach out directly to me and share that information with me. That would be the best way to get your voice heard.
And I can add, if you're a member of the public, our ROP website on the NRC website is very good. And there is a link there where you can provide feedback to the staff, or you can join one of the bi-monthly public meetings and add a comment at one of the public meetings. And that ends our session on right-sizing oversight. Thanks, everybody, for attending.